Security will escort you out if you don't move along. Brandon Mitchell's voice carried across the 15th floor of Phoenix Corporate Tower as he blocked the supply closet door. The 28-year-old marketing executive adjusted his designer tie and smirked at the small Latina woman holding a mop bucket. This is where real professionals work, not where the help hangs around pretending to understand business. Maria Santos stood perfectly still, her weathered hand steady on the cleaning cart handle. For a moment, the overhead fluorescent light caught something metallic beneath her uniform collar, a chain that disappeared under the fabric, holding what looked like military identification tags. Her dark eyes assessed Brandon with the calm precision of someone who had once tracked high-value targets through hostile territory. "I'm just cleaning the conference room, sir," she said quietly, her slight accent carrying years of controlled discipline. Brandon's colleagues erupted in laughter behind him, their expensive suits and confident postures creating a wall of corporate arrogance. Someone had already started recording with their phone, eager to capture what they assumed would be another humiliating encounter with the building's invisible cleaning staff. They had no idea they were about to underestimate the most dangerous woman in the building. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Maria Santos had perfected the art of invisibility over 10 years of night shifts at Phoenix Corporate Tower. At 45, her compact frame and quiet demeanor allowed her to move through the gleaming offices like a ghost, arriving each evening at 9 o'clock sharp when the last ambitious executives finally abandoned their desks. The janitorial uniform she wore, navy blue with Apex Cleaning Services embroidered in faded yellow thread, had become her camouflage in a world where success was measured in corner offices and stock options. Her routine never varied. Maria would start on the 20th floor and work her way down, methodically cleaning each space with the same attention to detail that had once meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. She knew which executives left half-eaten salads to rot in their desk drawers, which ones spilled coffee on important documents, and which ones stayed late enough to nod politely when she knocked before entering their offices. Most barely acknowledged her existence, treating her as part of the building's infrastructure rather than a human being with her own complex history. What none of them knew was that Maria Santos had once been one of the most elite soldiers in the United States military. From 2000 to 2012, she had served in Delta Force, the Army's most secretive special operations unit. She had completed missions in Afghanistan, Iraq, and half a dozen countries whose names never appeared in official reports. Her specialty had been reconnaissance and direct action, slipping into enemy territory, gathering intelligence, and eliminating threats with surgical precision. The Army had invested millions of dollars in her training, teaching her to speak 3 languages fluently, to operate dozens of weapon systems, and to survive in conditions that would break most people. Those skills had served her well in environments where a single mistake could compromise an entire operation or cost American lives. Maria had learned to read body language with the accuracy of a polygraph machine, to move through hostile territory without leaving a trace, and to remain calm under pressure that would paralyze ordinary soldiers. She had earned commendations for valor, leadership, and tactical excellence. Her commanding officers had marked her file for accelerated promotion, seeing in her the qualities that define the next generation of special operations leaders. The transition from that world to her current life hadn't happened overnight. Maria's husband Carlos, an Army Ranger she had met during a joint training exercise, had been killed by an improvised explosive device during his 3rd deployment to Kuwait, Afghanistan in 2011. The news had reached her while she was preparing for her own mission briefing, delivered by a chaplain whose practiced compassion couldn't soften the devastating reality. Carlos had been scheduled to rotate home in 6 weeks. They had been planning to start a family, to build the civilian life they had both dreamed about during long separations and dangerous assignments. His death had shattered something fundamental in Maria's understanding of sacrifice and purpose. She had completed her current deployment with mechanical efficiency, but the fire that had driven her through years of elite training had dimmed to ash. When her enlistment period ended in 2012, she made the decision that surprised everyone who knew her. She walked away from the military entirely, declining offers for specialized civilian positions and lucrative private security contracts. The choice to move to Phoenix had been practical rather than emotional. Carlos had grown up in the desert Southwest, and his family had embraced Maria as their own daughter during their brief marriage. His sister Alina lived in Tempe with her 3 children, providing the closest thing to family that Maria had left. More importantly, Phoenix offered anonymity, a sprawling city where she could disappear into ordinary life without the constant reminders of her military identity that haunted smaller communities near military bases. Maria had discovered that transitioning from elite military service to civilian employment presented challenges that no training had prepared her for. Her resume, necessarily vague about the details of her service, failed to impress hiring managers who couldn't understand the gap between her obvious intelligence and her lack of traditional corporate experience. Interviews became exercises in frustration as she struggled to translate skills like coordinated multi-team operations in hostile environments into language that made sense to human resources professionals. The cleaning job at Phoenix Corporate Tower had started as a temporary solution. Apex Cleaning Services hired without extensive background checks, offered health insurance benefits, and provided steady night shift work that allowed Maria to avoid the social complexities of daytime employment. The pay was modest but sufficient for her simple needs: a 1-bedroom apartment in Tempe, basic transportation, and the ability to send occasional care packages to Elena's children. What she hadn't expected was how the work would become a form of meditation. The repetitive nature of cleaning, vacuuming carpets, emptying trash bins, wiping down surfaces created a rhythm that calmed her mind in ways that expensive therapy sessions had failed to achieve. The building's after-hours quiet reminded her of the stillness she had once found during solo reconnaissance missions, when her survival depended on moving through enemy territory with perfect silence and awareness. Maria had also discovered that her military training provided unexpected advantages in her civilian role. Her attention to detail meant that she caught maintenance issues before they became costly problems, earning praise from building management. Her physical conditioning allowed her to complete cleaning routes more efficiently than colleagues half her age. Most importantly, her ability to observe and assess people had given her insights into the office dynamics that played out in the corporate tower's upper floors. She knew which executives were having affairs based on the pattern of after-hours meetings and the personal items left behind in conference rooms. She could predict which employees were likely to be terminated by observing the subtle changes in their workspace organization and the frequency of closed-door meetings with human resources. She understood the power structures and personal rivalries that drove decision-making in ways that would have impressed intelligence analysts. This knowledge remained private, filed away in her mind like classified information that would never appear in any official report. Maria had learned long ago that survival often depended on knowing more than others realized, while appearing to know nothing at all. The corporate world, she had discovered, operated according to many of the same principles as military intelligence. Information was power. Appearances could be deceiving, and the most dangerous threats often came from unexpected directions. Her daughter Sophia, now 22 and studying nursing at Arizona State University, remained the brightest part of Maria's new life. Sophia had been only 10 when her stepfather Carlos died, and she barely remembered the details of Maria's military service. To her, Maria was simply a hardworking mother who had sacrificed her own ambitions to provide stability and opportunity. Sophia knew that her mother was intelligent and capable, But she had never seen the warrior who had once moved through foreign battlefields with deadly precision. Maria preferred it that way. She had made a conscious decision to leave that part of herself buried, to build a new identity based on stability rather than conflict. The dog tags she wore beneath her uniform, Carlos's tags, alongside her own, served as private reminders of who she had been and what she had lost. But she had no desire to revisit that world or the violence that had defined it. The decision to remain invisible had served her well for nearly a decade. She had established a comfortable routine, earned respect from building management for her reliability and thoroughness, and found peace in the simplicity of her role. The corporate executives who worked in the tower's upper floors existed in a different universe from hers. Their concerns about quarterly profits and marketing campaigns as foreign to her as the diplomatic complexities she had once navigated in war zones. That careful separation had worked perfectly until Brandon Mitchell joined Pinnacle Marketing Solutions 18 months ago. The young executive had arrived with impressive credentials, an MBA from Arizona State University's prestigious business school, 3 years of experience at a competing firm in Los Angeles, and a social media presence that showcased his expertise in digital marketing strategies. His hiring had been accompanied by the kind of fanfare that Pinnacle reserved for rising stars, complete with a welcome reception and a corner office that reflected his expected contribution to the company's growth. Brandon had quickly established himself as a force within the company's culture. His presentations were polished and data-driven. His client relationships generated impressive revenue increases, and his leadership of the creative team had resulted in award-winning campaigns that enhanced Pinnacle's industry reputation. He cultivated an image of success that resonated with both colleagues and clients. Expensive suits, luxury accessories, and the confident demeanor of someone destined for executive leadership. What Maria had observed during her evening cleaning shifts was the gap between Brandon's public persona and his private behavior. She had seen him take credit for ideas generated by junior staff members during late-night strategy sessions. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She had witnessed him sabotage colleagues' presentations by deliberately scheduling conflicting meetings or withholding crucial information until deadlines made corrections impossible. Most troubling, she had watched him systematically undermine anyone he perceived as a threat to his advancement, using a combination of social manipulation and institutional politics that reminded her of the psychological warfare tactics she had studied during her military training. Brandon's treatment of the building's service staff had escalated gradually over the months following his arrival. It had started with dismissive comments and demands for special accommodations, requests that conference rooms be cleaned during specific windows, complaints about cleaning supplies left visible during important meetings, and expectations that his office receive priority attention regardless of the established cleaning schedule. These demands had been annoying but manageable, the kind of ego-driven behavior that Maria had learned to navigate without confrontation. The situation had deteriorated when Brandon began using the cleaning staff as props for his own entertainment and status building. He would stage conversations with colleagues that were clearly intended to demonstrate his authority over people he considered inferior. He would make jokes about the intelligence and capabilities of service workers, using their presence as opportunities to bond with clients and colleagues through shared condescension. Most painfully for Maria, he had begun timing his late-night work sessions to coincide with her cleaning schedule, creating opportunities for public interactions that reinforced the social hierarchy he was determined to maintain. Maria had initially responded to Brandon's behavior with the same professional detachment she applied to all workplace challenges. She adjusted her schedule to minimize contact, completed her assigned tasks efficiently, and avoided engaging with his provocations. Her military training had taught her that the best response to harassment was often no response at all, maintaining focus on the mission while refusing to be drawn into conflicts that served no strategic purpose. However, Brandon's campaign had begun to affect other aspects of her work environment. His treatment of her had emboldened other employees to adopt similar attitudes, creating a culture where disrespect towards service staff was not only tolerated, but actively encouraged. Maria had watched newer cleaning staff members quit rather than endure the daily humiliation, increasing her own workload and making it difficult for Apex Cleaning Services to maintain adequate staffing levels. More concerning was the way Brandon's behavior was beginning to mirror patterns Maria had observed in hostile territories: the systematic dehumanization of perceived enemies, the use of psychological pressure to establish dominance, and the creation of an environment where violence could escalate without warning. Her training had taught her to recognize these warning signs, to assess threats before they became critical, and to prepare for situations where defensive action might become necessary. The military mindset that Maria had tried to suppress was beginning to reassert itself as Brandon's harassment intensified. She found herself automatically cataloging his routines, identifying his weaknesses, and developing tactical assessments of how various confrontations might unfold. The part of her brain that had once planned complex operations was now analyzing corporate office layouts with the same precision she had once applied to enemy compounds. This mental shift troubled Maria more than Brandon's actual behavior. She had worked hard to leave the warrior mentality behind, to build a peaceful civilian identity that honored Carlos's memory without perpetuating the cycles of conflict that had ultimately claimed his life. The idea that she might be forced to access those suppressed skills represented a failure of the quiet life she had tried to construct. As Maria finished cleaning the executive conference room where tomorrow's confrontation would unfold, she touched the dog tags beneath her uniform and made a silent promise to Carlos's memory. She would continue to seek peaceful solutions, to maintain her professional dignity, and to avoid the kind of violence that had once defined her existence. But she was also beginning to accept that some situations required a different kind of response, one that her extensive training had prepared her to deliver. If Brandon's escalating behavior left her no alternative choice. Brandon Mitchell had always believed that success in business required the same ruthless instincts that separated apex predators from their prey. Standing 6 feet tall with the kind of lean athleticism that came from expensive personal trainers and boutique fitness studios, he possessed the physical presence that commanded attention in corporate boardrooms. His carefully styled brown hair, designer glasses, and collection of custom suits projected an image of success that had opened doors throughout his career. More importantly, his ability to read social dynamics and exploit weaknesses had allowed him to climb the corporate ladder faster than colleagues with superior technical skills or industry experience. The marketing world had provided Brandon with the perfect arena for his particular talents. Unlike fields that relied primarily on measurable expertise, marketing success depended heavily on perception, relationship management, and the ability to convince others that your ideas were both innovative and profitable. Brandon had mastered the art of taking credit for successful campaigns while distancing himself from failures, building a reputation that exceeded his actual contributions but generated the kind of results that impressed senior leadership. His arrival at Pinnacle Marketing Solutions had been carefully orchestrated to maximize his impact on the company culture. Brandon had spent weeks researching the firm's internal dynamics, identifying key decision makers, and developing strategies for rapid integration into the power structure. He understood that corporate environments operated according to unwritten rules about status, influence, and social hierarchy, and he had positioned himself to benefit from those systems rather than challenge them. The corner office that came with his senior creative director position represented more than just physical space. It was a symbol of his place in the company's food chain and a platform for the influence he intended to wield. Brandon had decorated the space with carefully chosen artifacts that communicated his personal brand, awards from previous positions, photographs with recognizable industry figures, and expensive technology that suggested both success and forward-thinking innovation. Every element was designed to reinforce his image as a rising star worthy of respect and deference. Brandon's management style reflected his understanding of corporate psychology and his belief that leadership required maintaining clear distinctions between those who mattered and those who served. He treated clients and senior executives with enthusiastic deference, recognizing their power to advance or derail his career. His interactions with peers were calculated to build alliances while subtly undermining potential rivals. Junior staff members received just enough mentorship to ensure their loyalty while being reminded of their subordinate status through carefully calibrated doses of criticism and praise. The building's service staff occupied the lowest tier of Brandon's social hierarchy, representing an opportunity to demonstrate his authority to colleagues and clients who might witness these interactions. He had observed that successful executives often used their treatment of subordinates as a way to signal their own importance, and he had adopted this strategy as part of his broader personal branding effort. The cleaning staff, security guards, and maintenance workers became unwitting participants in Brandon's ongoing performance of corporate dominance. Maria Santos had first appeared on Brandon's radar during his third month at Pinnacle, when he had begun staying late to work on a high-profile campaign for a luxury automotive client. He had noticed the small Latina woman moving through the offices with methodical efficiency, her presence so unobtrusive that she seemed almost invisible. Initially, he had paid her no more attention than he would any other piece of office infrastructure, acknowledging her existence only when her cleaning activities interfered with his work schedule. The first incident had occurred during a late-night video conference with clients on the West Coast, when Maria had knocked softly on his office door to ask about cleaning his space. Brandon had waved her away impatiently, annoyed that someone so obviously unimportant would interrupt a crucial business conversation. When she had returned 30 minutes later with the same quiet request, he had responded with the kind of sharp dismissal that he had seen other executives use to establish boundaries with service personnel. What had surprised Brandon was Maria's reaction to his rudeness. Instead of the apologetic deference he had expected, she had simply nodded and moved on to other tasks, her expression remaining neutral and professional. The lack of visible impact from his display of authority had been unsettling, suggesting that she either didn't understand the social dynamics at play or didn't care about his opinion. Both possibilities challenged his assumptions about how power relationships functioned in corporate environments. Over the following weeks, Brandon had begun paying closer attention to Maria's behavior, looking for signs of the respect or fear that he believed his position should command. He noticed that she maintained the same calm professionalism with everyone, from junior assistants to senior executives, treating all interactions with identical courtesy and efficiency. This consistency struck him as inappropriate, a failure. To recognize the importance of hierarchy and status that formed the foundation of successful business relationships, Brandon's attempts to assert his authority had escalated gradually, each test designed to provoke the kind of submissive response that would confirm his place in the office power structure. He had begun making special requests that exceeded normal cleaning protocols, demanding that his office receive priority attention and that Maria adjust her schedule to accommodate his preferences. When these demands failed to generate the deference he expected, he had moved to more direct forms of intimidation. The campaign had intensified when Brandon realized that his treatment of Maria could serve multiple purposes beyond simple ego gratification. His interactions with the cleaning staff had become opportunities to demonstrate his executive authority to colleagues and clients who might witness these exchanges. He had begun timing his requests and complaints to coincide with moments when important people might observe his commanding presence, using Maria's subordinate position to reinforce his own status within the company hierarchy. More strategically, Brandon had recognized that his ability to influence the building's service staff could provide him with valuable intelligence about his competitors within Pinnacle. Cleaning personnel had access to offices after hours, observed confidential documents left on desks, and overheard private conversations that might reveal useful information about upcoming projects or internal politics. By establishing his dominance over Maria and her colleagues, he hoped to create a network of inadvertent informants who might help him maintain his competitive advantage. The psychological dimension of Brandon's campaign reflected his deeper understanding of human nature and organizational behavior. He had studied business psychology during his MBA program, learning about the ways that power dynamics influenced workplace relationships and employee performance. His treatment of Maria was informed by theories about social dominance, status signaling, and the use of subordinate relationships to build coalition support among peers who shared similar attitudes toward hierarchy and control. Brandon believed that his behavior toward service staff served as a kind of test for potential allies within the company. Colleagues who laughed at his jokes about cleaning personnel, or who joined in his casual displays of authority, were signaling their alignment with his worldview and their willingness to participate in the informal power networks that really controlled corporate decision-making. Those who remained silent or showed discomfort were identifying themselves as unreliable partners who might lack the ruthlessness necessary for executive success. The social media component of Brandon's strategy had emerged naturally from his expertise in digital marketing and personal branding. He had begun documenting his workplace experiences through carefully crafted posts that portrayed him as a successful young executive navigating the challenges of corporate leadership. These posts often included subtle references to his interactions with subordinates, framed as humorous observations about workplace dynamics or leadership challenges that his followers might find relatable. The online response to these posts had encouraged Brandon to push the boundaries further, as his growing audience of young professionals seemed to appreciate his candid approach to corporate hierarchy and status management. Comments and engagement metrics suggested that his followers saw him as an authentic voice in a business world, often characterized by artificial politeness and political correctness. This positive feedback had reinforced his belief that his treatment of service staff was not only appropriate, but also admirable, a sign of the kind of strong leadership that successful companies required. Brandon's confidence in his approach had been bolstered by the lack of institutional pushback he had encountered. Building management had shown no interest in employee complaints about his behavior, and his supervisors at Pinnacle had praised his aggressive leadership style and results-oriented approach to team management. The absence of consequences had convinced him that his methods were not only acceptable but actively supported by the organizational culture that rewarded ambitious executives who could deliver profitable results regardless of their interpersonal approach. The escalation of Brandon's campaign against Maria had been driven partly by frustration with her continued resistance to his authority and partly by his growing recognition that she represented a unique challenge to his understanding of workplace power dynamics. Unlike other service staff who had eventually shown signs of intimidation or deference, Maria maintained her professional composure and methodical approach to her work, regardless of his provocations. This consistency suggested either unusual emotional resilience or a fundamental misunderstanding of her position within the corporate hierarchy. Brandon had begun to view his conflict with Maria as a test case for his leadership abilities and a proving ground for the psychological techniques he hoped to use in more important business relationships. If he could successfully establish his dominance over someone who seemed naturally resistant to authority, he reasoned, he would be better prepared to handle the kind of high-stakes negotiations and personnel management challenges that awaited him as he climbed toward executive leadership positions. The intensity of Brandon's focus on Maria had also been influenced by his growing awareness that other employees were watching their interactions with interest. Some colleagues had begun making jokes about the battle of wills between the young executive and the stubborn cleaning lady, treating their ongoing conflict as a source of office entertainment. Brandon understood that his eventual victory in this informal contest would enhance his reputation for toughness and determination, while any perceived defeat might undermine his credibility as a leader capable of handling difficult personnel situations. Unknown to Brandon, his escalating harassment campaign was being observed and analyzed by someone with far more sophisticated understanding of psychological warfare than any business school could provide. Maria's military training had taught her to recognize the patterns of behavior that preceded serious conflicts, to assess the motivations driving hostile actions, and to prepare appropriate responses for situations where peaceful resolution might not be possible. She had identified Brandon as a textbook example of the kind of predatory personality that thrived in environments where institutional authority protected aggressive behavior while silencing victims who lacked the social capital to defend themselves effectively. Maria's assessment of Brandon's psychological profile had been informed by her experience with similar personalities in military contexts, where unchecked aggression and abuse of power could compromise mission effectiveness and endanger lives. She had observed that individuals like Brandon typically escalated their behavior until they encountered meaningful resistance, testing boundaries through increasingly bold provocations until they either achieved complete dominance or faced consequences severe enough to modify their approach. The corporate environment at Pinnacle Marketing Solutions had provided Brandon with ideal conditions for this kind of predatory behavior, combining institutional indifference toward subordinate welfare with a culture that rewarded aggressive competition and status-seeking behavior. Maria recognized that Brandon's campaign against her was likely just one example of a broader pattern of exploitation that would continue until someone demonstrated the willingness and capability to impose meaningful costs for his actions. As Maria completed her evening cleaning routine and prepared to face another day of Brandon's harassment, she found herself drawing increasingly on the tactical mindset that had once served her in far more dangerous environments. The skills she had worked to suppress were reasserting themselves as her subconscious mind recognized threat patterns that civilian training had never prepared her to handle. The warrior she had tried to bury was beginning to awaken, and Maria was starting to accept that some battles could only be won by people prepared to fight them with overwhelming force and uncompromising determination. The next phase of their conflict would test not only Brandon's commitment to his campaign of intimidation, but also Maria's ability to maintain the peaceful civilian identity she had constructed over the past decade. The stakes were higher than either of them fully understood, and the outcome would transform not only their personal relationship, but the entire culture of the corporate environment where their battle was about to reach its climax. The corporate culture at Pinnacle Marketing Solutions had evolved over 15 years into a sophisticated ecosystem of competition, ambition, and carefully maintained social hierarchies. Founded by Tom Walsh, a former advertising executive who had built his reputation managing campaigns for Fortune 500 companies, the firm occupied 3 floors of Phoenix Corporate Tower and employed nearly 200 professionals across various marketing disciplines. The company's success had been built on its ability to attract top-tier talent with competitive salaries, generous benefits, and the kind of prestigious client roster that enhanced individual careers within the broader industry. Walsh had cultivated an environment that rewarded aggressive pursuit of results while maintaining the polished professionalism that high-end clients expected from their marketing partners. The office spaces reflected this philosophy, combining modern design elements with luxury finishes that communicated both creativity and financial success. Conference rooms featured state-of-the-art presentation technology. Employee workspaces included premium furniture and equipment, and common areas were designed to facilitate the kind of spontaneous collaboration that generated innovative campaign concepts. However, beneath the surface of professional excellence, Pinnacle operated according to informal rules that prioritized individual achievement over collective welfare. The company's rapid growth had created numerous opportunities for advancement, but it had also fostered intense competition among employees, who understood that career progression required not only excellent work performance, but also skillful navigation of complex interpersonal dynamics. Success at Pinnacle depended heavily on one's ability to build influential relationships, claim credit for profitable outcomes, and position oneself favorably within the shifting alliances that determined project assignments and promotion decisions. Maria Santos had observed these dynamics during her 10 years of cleaning the company's offices, developing an understanding of Pinnacle's internal politics that would have impressed experienced business consultants. Her after-hours access to private offices and conference rooms had provided her with unique insights into the conversations, documents, and behavioral patterns that revealed the true power structures operating behind the company's public facade. She had witnessed career-defining deals negotiated in hushed conversations, observed the personal rivalries that influenced major business decisions, and seen how individual ambitions often conflicted with stated company values. The building management structure that employed Maria through Apex Cleaning Services operated as a completely separate entity from Pinnacle's corporate hierarchy, creating a buffer zone that isolated service staff from the marketing firm's internal affairs. David Chun, the building manager responsible for coordinating maintenance and security services, maintained professional relationships with Pinnacle's executives, but had no authority over their treatment of contracted personnel. This separation meant that complaints about employee behavior toward cleaning staff were often dismissed as outside the scope of building management's responsibilities. Shun himself had developed a comfortable relationship with Brandon Mitchell, viewing the young marketing executive as a valuable networking contact who might provide future business opportunities or career advancement possibilities. The two men occasionally met for drinks at upscale restaurants, where Brandon would share industry gossip and professional insights that Chen found both entertaining and potentially useful. These social connections had created an informal alliance that influenced Chun's response to any complaints about Brandon's workplace behavior. The first serious escalation in Brandon's campaign against Maria had occurred during a high-profile client presentation that Pinnacle was hosting for a national restaurant chain, considering a major advertising contract. The presentation was scheduled for late afternoon, requiring Maria to adjust her normal cleaning schedule to accommodate the extended meeting. Brandon had specifically requested that all cleaning activities be suspended during the presentation to avoid any disruptions that might interfere with the important business discussion. Maria had arrived early to ensure that the conference room was properly prepared, completing her cleaning tasks well before the scheduled meeting time. However, as she was finishing her work and preparing to leave the area, Brandon had entered the room with several colleagues to conduct a final review of their presentation materials. Instead of acknowledging her efficient completion of the requested cleaning, he had immediately launched into a loud complaint about her presence in the space. "I specifically said no cleaning during our client meeting," Brandon had announced to his colleagues, his voice carrying the kind of authority that suggested he was addressing a serious protocol violation. "This is exactly the kind of unprofessional distraction that can cost us major accounts." Maria had attempted to explain that she was finishing her work ahead of schedule to avoid any conflict with the meeting, but Brandon had cut her off with a dismissive gesture. "I don't want to hear excuses," he had said, positioning himself between Maria and the exit door. "You need to understand that some things are more important than your cleaning schedule." The incident had been witnessed by 3 of Brandon's colleagues, all of whom had remained silent during the confrontation. Their lack of intervention had sent a clear message about the acceptability of such behavior within Pinnacle's culture, while their obvious discomfort had suggested that they understood the inappropriate nature of Brandon's actions, even if they lacked the courage to challenge him directly. More significantly, the confrontation had been partially recorded by Brandon himself, who had been testing the conference room's video equipment in preparation for the client presentation. The footage, which captured his authoritative handling of what he described as a service personnel issue, had been edited and posted to his professional social media accounts as an example of the leadership challenges that successful executives face in maintaining workplace standards. The post had generated significant engagement from Brandon's growing online following, with comments praising his firm approach to personnel management and his commitment to maintaining professional standards during important business activities. Several followers had shared similar stories about their own experiences managing difficult service staff, creating a thread of conversation that reinforced Brandon's belief that his behavior represented normal and appropriate executive leadership. The social media attention had transformed what might have been an isolated incident into a public validation of Brandon's approach to workplace authority. The positive response from his professional network had encouraged him to document similar interactions, creating a feedback loop that rewarded increasingly aggressive behavior, while providing him with content for his personal branding efforts. Maria's reaction to the incident had been informed by her military experience with psychological operations and her understanding of how public humiliation was used as a tool of control in hostile environments. She recognized that Brandon's behavior was designed not only to establish his dominance over her, but also to send a message to other employees about the consequences of challenging his authority. The public nature of the confrontation, combined with its documentation and distribution through social media, represented an escalation that required careful strategic consideration. The impact of Brandon's campaign had begun extending beyond Maria to affect other members of the cleaning staff and building service personnel. Younger employees who lacked Maria's emotional resilience and professional experience had started requesting schedule changes to avoid working on floors where they might encounter Brandon or his colleagues. Turnover rates among cleaning staff had increased significantly, forcing Apex Cleaning Services to raise wages and offer additional incentives to maintain adequate staffing levels for the Phoenix corporate tower contract. Lisa Rodriguez, the evening receptionist who worked for Pinnacle's main competitor on the building's 14th floor, had become an inadvertent witness to many of Brandon's confrontations with Maria. Her position at the reception desk provided her with clear sightlines to the elevator banks and common areas where these interactions often occurred, and her natural empathy had made her increasingly uncomfortable with what she was observing. Rodriguez had attempted to intervene indirectly on several occasions, timing her own activities to coincide with Maria's presence in shared spaces and engaging in friendly conversations that might discourage Brandon from escalating his harassment. However, these efforts had only succeeded in drawing Brandon's negative attention to Rodriguez herself, leading to complaints about her company's use of common areas and suggestions that competitive firms should be more strictly limited in their access to building amenities. The isolation that Maria was experiencing had been carefully orchestrated by Brandon to maximize her vulnerability while minimizing the likelihood of effective intervention by sympathetic colleagues or building management. He had learned to time his confrontations for moments when potential witnesses were either absent or positioned to benefit from remaining silent. His complaints about Maria's work performance had been strategically crafted to create a paper trail that might justify more serious disciplinary action while avoiding the kind of explicit discrimination that could trigger legal consequences. Brandon's campaign had also included subtle attempts to sabotage Maria's work performance through interference with her equipment and supplies. Cleaning carts had been mysteriously moved from their designated storage areas, supplies had been tampered with or contaminated, and access codes for restricted areas had been changed without proper notification to cleaning staff supervisors. These acts of sabotage were designed to create situations where Maria might appear incompetent or unreliable, providing Brandon with justification for his complaints about her professionalism. The psychological pressure of constant harassment had begun affecting Maria in ways that reminded her of the stress responses she had experienced during her most challenging military deployments. She found herself conducting detailed reconnaissance of Brandon's daily routines, identifying patterns in his behavior that might predict when confrontations were most likely to occur. Her sleep patterns had become irregular as her subconscious mind processed the ongoing threat assessment and prepared contingency plans for various escalation scenarios. Most concerning for Maria was the way her suppressed military training was reasserting itself through automatic responses that she struggled to control. During Brandon's more aggressive confrontations, she had begun adopting defensive postures and conducting threat assessments that were entirely inappropriate for civilian workplace conflicts. The part of her mind that had once tracked enemy movements through hostile territory was now mapping escape routes from office buildings and evaluating the tactical advantages of various positions within corporate conference rooms. The internal conflict between her civilian identity and her military training was becoming increasingly difficult to manage, as Brandon's behavior showed no signs of moderating. Maria had invested 10 years in building a peaceful life that honored her husband's memory while providing stability for her daughter, but she was beginning to accept that some threats could not be addressed through passive resistance or professional courtesy. The breaking point was approaching rapidly as Brandon's confidence in his immunity from consequences continued to grow. His success in isolating Maria from potential allies, combined with the positive reinforcement he was receiving from his social media audience, had convinced him that he was operating within acceptable boundaries of executive authority. The absence of institutional pushback had reinforced his belief that his methods were not only appropriate, but also admirable examples of strong leadership in action. What Brandon failed to understand was that his campaign against Maria was being observed and analyzed by someone whose professional training had included extensive study of interrogation techniques, psychological warfare, and the methods used by hostile forces to break down individual resistance. Maria's military experience had taught her to recognize the patterns of behavior that preceded serious violence and to prepare appropriate responses for situations where peaceful resolution was no longer possible. The next phase of their conflict would test the limits of both Brandon's commitment to his harassment campaign and Maria's ability to maintain the civilian persona she had constructed over the past decade. The outcome would be determined not by corporate politics or social media influence, but by the fundamental question of what happened when someone with elite military training was finally pushed beyond the boundaries of peaceful endurance. The quarterly board meeting at Pinnacle Marketing Solutions was scheduled for Thursday evening, requiring the main conference room to be transformed into an impressive showcase for the company's most important stakeholders. Tom Walsh had personally requested that the space receive premium attention, with every surface polished to perfection and all presentation equipment tested and calibrated for optimal performance. The meeting would determine funding for several major initiatives, making it crucial that every detail reflect the company's commitment to excellence and professional standards. Maria had arrived 2 hours early to ensure that her preparation would meet Walsh's exacting requirements. She had methodically cleaned every surface in the conference room, arranged the seating to precise specifications, and verified that all technology was functioning properly. The massive mahogany table gleamed under the carefully adjusted lighting, and the floor-to-ceiling windows offered an unobstructed view of Phoenix's downtown skyline as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. As Maria was completing her final inspection of the presentation equipment, Brandon Mitchell entered the conference room with his usual entourage of junior executives and marketing associates. The group was engaged in animated discussion about their upcoming presentation to the board, their voices carrying the nervous energy that accompanied high-stakes business performances. Brandon was scheduled to present a comprehensive analysis of digital marketing trends and their implications for Pinnacle's strategic direction, a presentation that could significantly enhance his standing within the company's leadership hierarchy. "What is she still doing here?" Brandon's voice cut through the group's conversation as he noticed Maria adjusting the projection screen settings. His tone carried the familiar edge of irritation that had become characteristic of his interactions with service personnel. "I specifically requested that all cleaning be completed before our preparation session." Maria looked up from the equipment controls, her expression remaining neutral despite the obvious hostility in Brandon's voice. "I'm just finishing the final equipment check, sir," she replied calmly. "The room will be ready in 2 minutes." Brandon stepped closer to Maria, positioning himself between her and the exit in a gesture that his colleagues recognized as a familiar power play. 2 minutes is 2 minutes too long," he said, his voice rising to ensure that everyone in the room could hear his assertion of authority. "This is a critical business meeting, and I won't have it compromised by service staff who can't follow simple instructions." David Chun had chosen that moment to enter the conference room to conduct his own inspection of the space, arriving just as Brandon was escalating his confrontation with Maria. Chun's presence represented an opportunity for Brandon to demonstrate his executive authority to building management while simultaneously addressing what he characterized as a persistent personnel problem. "David, I'm glad you're here," Brandon said, turning to address the building manager while keeping Maria positioned within the group's attention. "We've discussed this issue before, but it keeps recurring. I need you to understand that this level of service is unacceptable for a company of our caliber." Chung glanced nervously between Brandon and Maria, clearly uncomfortable with being drawn into a confrontation that he preferred to avoid. His business relationship with Brandon had been profitable and personally rewarding, but the current situation was forcing him to choose between supporting his networking contact and maintaining professional standards for building operations. "I'm sure we can work this out," Chun began diplomatically, but Brandon interrupted him with a dismissive gesture. "No, this has gone on long enough," Brandon declared, his voice taking on the authoritative tone that he used during important client presentations. "I want her removed from our floor permanently. Pinnacle Marketing Solutions generates too much revenue for this building to tolerate this kind of unprofessional service." The demand represented a significant escalation from Brandon's previous complaints, moving beyond personal harassment to an explicit attempt to eliminate Maria's employment opportunities within the building. His colleagues exchanged glances that mixed admiration for his assertiveness with discomfort about the public nature of his attack on a service employee who had shown no sign of actual incompetence. Maria remained perfectly still during Brandon's monologue, her military training automatically assessing the tactical situation and the positioning of everyone in the room. Her hands hung loosely at her sides, but her weight was balanced on the balls of her feet in a stance that could facilitate rapid movement in any direction. Her breathing remained controlled and steady, even as her heartbeat began to increase in response to the escalating threat assessment that her subconscious mind was conducting. "Sir, with respect," Maria said quietly, her voice carrying a controlled precision that seemed somehow different from her usual deferential tone. "I'm simply doing my job according to the schedule provided by building management. If there's been a miscommunication about timing, I'm happy to discuss it with my supervisor." Brandon's face flushed with anger at what he perceived as continued defiance of his authority. The presence of his colleagues and building management had transformed the confrontation into a public test of his ability to enforce his will, and Maria's calm professionalism was undermining the narrative of incompetence and insubordination that he had been constructing over months of harassment. "You don't get to negotiate with me," Brandon said, stepping closer to Maria until he was well within her personal space. "Your service staff. Your job is to do what you're told when you're told to do it. If you can't handle that basic requirement, then you don't belong in a professional environment." The physical intimidation represented a line that Brandon had not previously crossed, moving from verbal harassment to the kind of aggressive posturing that Maria's training had taught her to recognize as a precursor to violence. Her threat assessment protocols, dormant for a decade, suddenly activated with crystalline clarity as her mind began calculating distances, reaction times, and potential defensive responses. "I understand your frustration," Maria replied, her voice remaining steady even as her body began preparing for possibilities that her civilian identity wanted to avoid. "Perhaps we could discuss this at a more appropriate time and place." Brandon interpreted her continued calm as evidence that his intimidation tactics were failing to achieve their intended effect. His reputation among his colleagues depended partly on his ability to handle difficult personnel situations with decisive authority, and Maria's composure was beginning to make him appear ineffective rather than powerful. "There's nothing to discuss," Brandon said, raising his voice to a level that could be heard throughout the building's 15th floor. "You're finished here. Pack your things and get out before I call security to have you escorted from the building." The ultimatum hung in the air like a challenge that demanded immediate response. Brandon's colleagues shifted uncomfortably, recognizing that their leader had pushed the confrontation beyond the boundaries of acceptable workplace behavior while committing himself to a course of action that he might not be able to enforce. David Chun looked increasingly distressed as he realized that his business relationship with Brandon was forcing him to participate in what was clearly an inappropriate termination of a competent employee. Maria stood motionless for several seconds, her mind processing the tactical situation and the strategic implications of various response options. Her military training had taught her that some conflicts could only be resolved through the application of overwhelming force, but her civilian identity demanded that she seek peaceful solutions even in situations where peace might not be possible. The moment of decision arrived when Brandon, frustrated by Maria's lack of visible reaction to his ultimatum, reached out to grab her arm in a gesture designed to physically force her compliance with his demands. The contact triggered automatic defensive responses that Maria had trained for thousands of hours during her military service, responses that operated independently of conscious decision-making and were designed to neutralize threats with maximum efficiency. Maria's reaction was instantaneous and devastating. Her left hand deflected Brandon's reaching arm, while her right hand struck a precise nerve cluster at the base of his neck, a technique that temporarily disrupted neurological function without causing permanent damage. Simultaneously, her foot hooked behind his ankle as she used his forward momentum to execute a perfectly controlled takedown that sent him to the conference room floor with stunning speed and precision. Brandon found himself flat on his back, staring up at the ceiling with no clear understanding of how he had arrived in that position. The nerve strike had temporarily scrambled his coordination and left him unable to process the rapid sequence of events that had transformed him from aggressor to victim in less than 2 seconds. His designer suit was rumpled but undamaged, and he had suffered no injury beyond the profound shock of discovering that his assumptions about power dynamics had been completely incorrect. The silence in the conference room was absolute as Brandon's. Colleagues struggled to comprehend what they had just witnessed. The small, quiet cleaning lady who had endured months of harassment without complaint had just demonstrated a level of physical capability that seemed to belong in action movies rather than corporate offices. Their understanding of Maria Santos was undergoing a radical transformation as they realized that her previous restraint had been a choice rather than an inability to defend herself. David Chun stood frozen in place, his mouth slightly open as he tried to process the implications of what had occurred in his building. The woman he had dismissed as an inconsequential service employee had just neutralized a much larger opponent with the kind of technical expertise that suggested extensive professional training in combat techniques. Maria remained standing exactly where she had been when Brandon attempted to grab her, her posture relaxed but alert as she assessed whether the immediate threat had been resolved. Her breathing remained controlled, and her expression showed no sign of anger or satisfaction. Despite the dramatic reversal of the power dynamic that had defined her relationship with Brandon for months. "I am former United States Army Delta Force," Maria said quietly, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command situations where lives depended on instant obedience. "I served 12 years in special operations before transitioning to civilian life. I chose this work because I wanted peace, not because I was incapable of anything else." The revelation transformed the atmosphere in the conference room as Brandon's colleagues began to understand the magnitude of their leaders' miscalculation. Delta Force represented the pinnacle of military special operations, an elite unit whose selection standards and training protocols were legendary within defense circles. The idea that they had been witnessing months of harassment directed at someone with that background was both stunning and deeply embarrassing. Brandon slowly pushed himself into a sitting position, his coordination gradually returning as the effects of the nerve strike diminished. His face showed a complex mixture of humiliation, confusion, and dawning awareness that his behavior had been directed at someone who could have ended their conflict at any moment with devastating finality. "Why didn't you say anything?" Brandon asked, his voice barely above a whisper as he struggled to reconcile his assumptions about Maria with the reality of her background. Maria looked down at him with an expression that mixed disappointment with something that might have been pity. "Because who I was in the military doesn't define who I choose to be in civilian life," she said. "I left that world to build something better. I work here because it's honest employment that allows me to support my daughter while she completes her nursing degree. I never wanted anyone to know about my background because I was hoping to avoid exactly this kind of situation." The explanation carried an implicit criticism of Brandon's behavior while demonstrating the kind of principled restraint that his own actions had lacked. Maria had possessed the capability to end their conflict from the beginning, but had chosen to endure months of harassment rather than resort to the violence that her training had made available to her. Tom Walsh chose that moment to enter the conference room for his own pre-meeting inspection, arriving to find his senior creative director sitting on the floor while a cleaning lady stood over him, explaining her military service record. The scene was sufficiently surreal that Walsh initially assumed he was interrupting some kind of elaborate team-building exercise or promotional video production. "What exactly is happening here?" Walsh asked, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from 20 years of executive leadership and a natural ability to cut through confusion to reach essential facts. David Chun stepped forward to provide an explanation, but Maria spoke first, her military bearing evident as she addressed the senior executive with crisp professionalism. "Sir, there was an incident involving inappropriate workplace behavior. I used minimal force to defend myself when physical intimidation escalated to actual contact. No one was injured, and the situation is now resolved." Walsh's expression shifted from confusion to serious concern as he began to understand that he was dealing with a potential legal and public relations crisis rather than a minor personnel dispute. His eyes moved from Maria to Brandon to the assembled group of witnesses, calculating the potential consequences of whatever had transpired in his company's conference room. "Brandon, get up and explain what happened," Walsh commanded, his tone making it clear that he expected complete honesty rather than the kind of creative interpretation that might protect reputations or minimize legal liability. Brandon struggled to his feet, his usual confidence completely absent as he faced the prospect of explaining his months-long harassment campaign to his boss. The presence of multiple witnesses made it impossible to construct an alternative narrative that might cast his behavior in a favorable light, and his growing awareness of Maria's background had eliminated any possibility of portraying himself as the victim of an unprovoked attack. "I made some mistakes," Brandon began hesitantly, his voice lacking the assertive tone that usually characterized his interactions with senior leadership. "I may have been too aggressive in my communications with building service staff. I didn't realize that Miss Santos had such an impressive military background." Walsh's expression hardened as he recognized the inadequacy of Brandon's explanation and its implications for the company's potential legal exposure. "Define too aggressive," he said, his voice carrying the kind of controlled anger that employees had learned to fear more than outright shouting. The next 30 minutes involved a detailed reconstruction of Brandon's harassment campaign as witnessed by his colleagues, whose loyalty shifted rapidly from their former leader to their own career preservation as they realized the seriousness of the situation. Their testimonies revealed a pattern of behavior that created significant legal liability for Pinnacle Marketing Solutions while demonstrating a fundamental failure of judgment that called into question Brandon's fitness for executive leadership. Maria's own account of events was delivered with the precision and objectivity of a military after-action report, focusing on observable facts while avoiding emotional characterizations or personal attacks. Her restraint and professionalism stood in stark contrast to Brandon's months of aggressive behavior, creating a narrative that left no doubt about which party had acted appropriately throughout their extended conflict. The immediate consequences were swift and decisive. Brandon was terminated effective immediately, his access to company systems revoked, and his personal belongings boxed for pickup by security personnel. His social media accounts were monitored to ensure that no confidential company information was disclosed as part of any narrative he might construct about his departure. The young executive who had entered the conference room as a rising star left as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked arrogance and abuse of power. David Chun faced his own reckoning as building management reviewed his handling of previous complaints about Brandon's behavior and his failure to protect service staff from harassment. His business relationship with Brandon had compromised his professional judgment and created liability for the building's management company, leading to mandatory training on workplace harassment and revised protocols for handling employee complaints. Maria's revelation had transformed her status within the building's ecosystem, but she made it clear that she preferred to continue her work without the kind of special treatment or celebrity status that her military background might have generated. She valued the anonymity and routine that her cleaning position provided, and she had no desire to become a symbol or spokesperson for any cause beyond the basic principle that all workers deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. Story of the confrontation spread rapidly through Phoenix's business community, enhanced by social media documentation that Brandon had himself created during his harassment campaign. The narrative of a corporate executive being humbled by a Delta Force operator working as a cleaning lady captured public imagination while serving as a powerful reminder that appearances could be profoundly deceiving. For Maria, the incident represented both an ending and a beginning. She had successfully defended herself without compromising the peaceful civilian identity she had worked to construct, but she had also been forced to reveal aspects of her past that she had hoped to keep private. The challenge now was to integrate her military experience with her civilian life in ways that honored both her service to her country and her commitment to building a better future for her daughter. 6 months later, Maria continued her work at Phoenix Corporate Tower, but her relationships with building staff and corporate employees had evolved to reflect the respect that her background and her handling of the Brandon situation had earned. She had been approached about consulting opportunities and speaking engagements, but she had declined most offers in favor of the stability and routine that allowed her to focus on her family and her own healing process. Brandon's departure had created opportunities for cultural change at Pinnacle Marketing Solutions, as new leadership implemented policies designed to prevent the kind of harassment that Maria had endured. The company had also established partnerships with veterans organizations to support the employment and career development of former military personnel transitioning to civilian careers. The lesson that emerged from their conflict was both simple and profound. Strength came in many forms, and the most dangerous opponents were often those who chose restraint until restraint was no longer possible. Maria Santos had demonstrated that true power lay not in the ability to dominate others, but in the wisdom to know when and how to apply one's capabilities in defense of justice and human dignity. Every person carries hidden chapters of their story, experiences that shape their character in ways that might never be visible to casual observers. The corporate executive who seems invincible might be concealing deep insecurities, while the quiet service worker might possess capabilities that could reshape any situation in seconds. The wise approach to human relationships involves treating everyone with the respect and consideration that acknowledges the possibility that there is always more to people than what appears on the surface. In a world where power is often measured by titles, salaries, and social media followers, Maria Santos had reminded everyone that the most impressive achievements sometimes belong to those who choose to work quietly in service of others while carrying their greatest accomplishments as private sources of strength rather than public displays of superiority. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation in the Phoenix corporate tower conference room created ripple effects that extended far beyond the building's polished marble lobby and into the broader Phoenix business community. Within hours of Brandon Mitchell's termination, word had spread through professional networks, social media platforms, and industry publications about the extraordinary encounter between a corporate executive and a cleaning lady who turned out to be a former Delta Force operator. The story captured public imagination not only because of its dramatic reversal of expectations, but also because it challenged fundamental assumptions about power, respect, and the invisible people who keep society functioning. Maria Santos found herself at the center of attention she had never sought and actively tried to avoid. Local news stations requested interviews, business publications wanted feature stories, and motivational speaking agencies offered lucrative contracts for corporate presentations about leadership, resilience, and hidden potential. The requests came from across the country as the story gained national traction through social media, shares, and news coverage that portrayed her as a symbol of unrecognized capability and quiet dignity. The media attention created complications that Maria had not anticipated when she made the decision to reveal her military background. Reporters had begun investigating her service record, contacting former colleagues, and attempting to verify details about her Delta Force career that she preferred to keep private. The operational security protocols that had governed her military service made her instinctively uncomfortable with public scrutiny, even when the coverage was overwhelmingly positive and respectful. More challenging was the impact on her daughter, Sophia, whose peaceful college experience at Arizona State University was suddenly disrupted by classmates and professors who had seen news coverage about her mother's background. Sophia had known that Maria had served in the military, but she had never understood the elite nature of her mother's service or the dangerous missions that had defined her career before her transition to civilian life. The revelation forced conversations about family history that both women had been avoiding for years. Sophia's initial reaction had been a complex mixture of pride, confusion, and concern about why her mother had chosen to conceal such an impressive background. During a difficult phone conversation the evening after the incident, Sophia had expressed frustration about feeling like she didn't really know her own mother, while Maria struggled to explain her reasons for maintaining separation between her military identity and her civilian life. "I wanted you to see me as your mother, not as a soldier," Maria had explained during their late-night conversation. Everything I did in the military was about protecting people I would never meet. Everything I've done since leaving the military has been about protecting you and building the kind of life where you could pursue your dreams without carrying the weight of my experiences. The conversation had marked a turning point in their relationship, opening doors to discussions about Carlos's death, Maria's struggles with transitioning to civilian life, and the sacrifices she had made to ensure Sophia's stability and opportunities. For the first time, Sophia began to understand the depth of her mother's love and the conscious choices she had made to prioritize family over career advancement or public recognition. Tom Walsh had moved quickly to address the legal and public relations implications of the incident at Pinnacle Marketing Solutions. The company retained a crisis management firm to develop messaging that acknowledged the inappropriate behavior while emphasizing their commitment to creating respectful workplace environments. Walsh himself had met personally with Maria to apologize for the failure of company oversight that had allowed the harassment to continue unchecked. The meeting between Walsh and Maria had taken place in his private office, away from the public attention that surrounded the story. Walsh had expected to encounter someone seeking financial compensation or legal action against his company, but Maria's primary concerns had been about maintaining her employment and ensuring that similar situations wouldn't affect other service workers in the future. "I don't want special treatment because of my background," Maria had told Walsh during their conversation. "I want to continue doing my job, and I want other people in similar positions to be treated with basic human dignity. That's all I've ever wanted." Walsh had been impressed by Maria's professionalism and her focus on systemic improvements rather than personal gain. Her response had confirmed his assessment that Pinnacle had narrowly avoided a legal and public relations disaster that could have destroyed the company's reputation and resulted in massive financial settlements. The policy changes that emerged from the incident included mandatory harassment training for all employees, revised protocols for reporting and investigating workplace complaints, and the establishment of anonymous feedback systems that allowed service workers to report problems without fear of retaliation. Walsh had also implemented regular surveys to assess workplace culture and identify potential issues before they escalated to crisis levels. Brandon Mitchell's departure from Phoenix's marketing industry had been swift and permanent. His termination from Pinnacle had been followed by the circulation of information about his behavior among industry leaders, effectively blacklisting him from similar positions with competing firms. His social media presence, which had once showcased his professional achievements and industry insights, became a liability as former followers distanced themselves from someone associated with workplace harassment and poor judgment. The young executive who had entered the corporate world with such confidence and ambition found himself forced to relocate to another city, where his reputation might not precede him. His experience at Pinnacle became a cautionary tale about the consequences of unchecked arrogance and the importance of treating all people with respect, regardless of their position or perceived status. David Chun had retained his position as building manager, but his relationship with building tenants had been fundamentally altered by his failure to address the harassment situation appropriately. His business partnerships with Pinnacle executives had been terminated, and his annual performance review had included specific criticism about his handling of employee complaints and his apparent bias toward high-profile tenants over building service staff. The incident had forced Chun to confront his own assumptions about workplace hierarchies and the importance of maintaining professional standards regardless of personal relationships or potential business advantages. He had enrolled in additional training programs focused on conflict resolution, employment law, and ethical leadership, recognizing that his career advancement depended on demonstrating genuine commitment to improvement, rather than merely surviving the immediate crisis. Lisa Rodriguez had emerged as an unexpected advocate for workplace dignity, using her position and her witness testimony to support broader changes in building policies and tenant relationships. Her willingness to speak honestly about what she had observed had contributed to the accountability measures that followed the incident, and her insights had informed the development of new protocols for protecting service workers from harassment or intimidation. Rodriguez had also become a bridge between the building's corporate tenants and service staff, facilitating communication and understanding that helped prevent future conflicts. Her efforts had been recognized by building management and had led to her appointment to a newly created tenant relations committee focused on maintaining positive workplace environments throughout the building. The broader Phoenix business community had responded to the story with a mixture of fascination, embarrassment, and determination to address similar issues within their own organizations. Professional associations had organized workshops on workplace respect and harassment prevention, while business publications had published articles analyzing the systemic factors that allowed such situations to develop and persist. The incident had also sparked conversations about the employment challenges faced by military veterans transitioning to civilian careers, particularly those whose service records included classified or sensitive information that couldn't be fully disclosed during traditional job interviews. Several Phoenix area companies had partnered with veterans organizations to develop hiring programs that better recognize the value of military experience, while providing appropriate support for successful career transitions. Maria's decision about how to handle the ongoing attention had been informed by conversations with Sophia, discussions with veterans advocacy groups, and her own reflection about the balance between privacy and public service. She had ultimately agreed to participate in a limited number of speaking engagements focused on veterans' issues and workplace dignity, but she had declined opportunities that would have required extensive travel or ongoing public appearances. Her first speaking engagement had been at a veterans organization event in Phoenix, where she had addressed an audience of former military personnel who were navigating their own transitions to civilian careers. Her message had focused on the importance of finding purpose and meaning in civilian work while maintaining the values and discipline that military service had instilled. The skills we learned in the military don't disappear when we leave active duty, Maria had told the audience. But we have to be thoughtful about how we apply those skills in civilian environments. Our goal should be to contribute positively to our communities while building the kind of life that honors our service without being defined entirely by it. The response to her presentation had been overwhelmingly positive, with attendees appreciating her honest discussion of the challenges and opportunities that came with military to civilian career transitions. Several audience members had approached her afterward to share their own experiences and to thank her for demonstrating that it was possible to maintain dignity and self-respect while building successful civilian careers. Maria had also agreed to consult with Pinnacle Marketing Solutions on the development of their revised workplace policies, providing insights about power dynamics, conflict de-escalation, and the creation of inclusive environments that respected all employees regardless of their background or position. Her contributions had helped shape training programs that address not only legal compliance issues, but also the cultural changes necessary to prevent harassment and discrimination. The financial implications of the incident had been significant for all parties involved. Brandon's termination had included forfeiture of stock options and performance bonuses that would have been worth hundreds of thousands of dollars over the following years. His legal expenses and the difficulty of finding comparable employment had created financial pressures that forced major lifestyle changes and career reassessment. Pinnacle Marketing Solutions had invested substantial resources in crisis management, legal consultation, policy development, and training programs designed to address the cultural issues that had allowed the harassment to occur. While these costs were significant, they were far less than the potential legal settlements and reputation damage that could have resulted from inadequate response to the situation. Maria had declined financial compensation beyond her normal wages despite legal advice that she could have successfully pursued significant damages through civil litigation. Her decision had been motivated by her desire to avoid prolonged legal proceedings that would have extended public attention and potentially interfered with her family's privacy and stability. The building management company had implemented new insurance policies and risk management protocols designed to prevent similar incidents while providing better protection for both tenants and service workers. These changes had resulted in increased operational costs, but had also created competitive advantages in attracting tenants who valued ethical business practices and positive workplace environments. 6 months after the incident, Maria's daily routine had largely returned to its previous patterns, though her relationships within the building had evolved significantly. Corporate employees who had previously ignored her now greeted her respectfully, and several had taken the initiative to learn her name and express appreciation for her work. The change in atmosphere had been noticed by other service workers, who reported feeling more valued and secure in their positions. Sophia had completed her nursing degree with honors and had accepted a position at a Phoenix area hospital specializing in trauma care. Her understanding of her mother's background had deepened her appreciation for the sacrifices that military families make and had influenced her career choice toward serving others in high-pressure situations where specialized skills could make life or death differences. The relationship between mother and daughter had strengthened through their conversations about family history, military service, and the values that guided important life decisions. Sophia had gained a new perspective on her mother's choices and had developed her own sense of pride in their family service to others, whether in military or civilian contexts. Maria had also reconnected with several former military colleagues who had reached out after seeing news coverage of the incident. These conversations had helped her process her own feelings about her military service and her civilian career while providing opportunities to support other veterans who were facing similar transition challenges. The story of Maria Santos and Brandon Mitchell had become part of Phoenix business folklore, referenced in training programs, diversity initiatives, and leadership development courses throughout the region. The incident served as a powerful reminder that assumptions about people based on their appearance, position, or circumstances could be profoundly misleading and potentially dangerous. More importantly, the story had contributed to broader conversations about respect, dignity, and the recognition that every person deserves to be treated with basic human consideration, regardless of their role or status. The corporate executive who learned humility through defeat had ultimately served a purpose greater than his own career ambitions, while the quiet cleaning lady had demonstrated that true strength often lies in restraint, wisdom, and the courage to act decisively when action becomes necessary. The legacy of their encounter would continue to influence workplace cultures, policy decisions, and individual interactions long after the immediate drama had faded from public attention. Maria Santos had returned to the peaceful civilian life she had sought, but she had also left an indelible mark on everyone who had witnessed her demonstration that power comes in many forms, and the most impressive achievements often belong to those who choose to serve others quietly while carrying their greatest accomplishments as sources of inner strength rather than public recognition. In a world where social media prominence and corporate titles often define perceived importance, Maria had reminded everyone that the people who truly keep society functioning are often invisible until the moment when their unique capabilities become essential for justice, protection, or positive change. Her story stood as proof that every person has hidden depths, and the wisest approach to human relationships involves treating everyone with the respect and consideration that acknowledges the possibility that there is always more to people than what appears on the surface. The winter morning arrived with unusual clarity in Phoenix, the desert air crisp and clean as Maria Santos prepared for what would become an unexpected turning point in her carefully constructed civilian life. 18 months had passed since. The confrontation that had transformed her from an invisible service worker into an unlikely symbol of hidden strength and workplace dignity. The media attention had finally subsided, the policy changes had been implemented, and the business community had moved on to other stories. But the deeper transformation set in motion by that single moment continued to reshape lives in ways that no one could have anticipated. Elena Vasquez, Carlos's sister, had driven from Tucson to join Maria for a visit to the Arizona Veterans Memorial Cemetery, where they would honor Carlos's memory on what would have been his 42nd birthday. The annual tradition had begun 5 years after Carlos's death, when Maria had finally felt emotionally ready to create positive rituals around his memory, rather than simply enduring the pain of his absence. Elena's 3 children, now teenagers, had grown up knowing their Uncle Carlos through stories and photographs, understanding that his sacrifice had been part of something larger than any individual life. The cemetery visit had taken on additional significance this year because Maria had finally decided to apply for a federal position that would utilize her military experience while allowing her to remain in Phoenix near Sofia and Elena's family. The Department of Veterans Affairs had been recruiting former Special Operations personnel for positions in their crisis intervention and counseling programs, recognizing that certain types of trauma could only be effectively addressed by people who had experienced similar challenges during their own military service. The application process had required Maria to document aspects of her Delta Force career that she had never discussed with civilian employers, including classified operations whose details remained restricted, but whose psychological impact had shaped her understanding of stress, loss, and recovery. The federal background investigation had been exhaustive, involving interviews with former colleagues, commanders, and military psychologists who had worked with special operations personnel during the height of overseas deployments. What had surprised Maria during the application process was discovering how many of her former teammates were facing similar decisions about whether to integrate their military experience with their civilian careers. The special operations community had always been small and tightly connected, but the transition to civilian life had scattered these relationships across the country and into diverse career paths that often provided little opportunity for the kind of mutual support that had sustained them during their military service. Dr. James Morrison, a military psychologist who had worked with Maria's unit during her final deployment, had contacted her during the background investigation process to discuss not only her qualifications for the VA position, but also her potential participation in a research study about successful military to civilian career transitions. Morrison's research had identified Maria as an example of someone who had managed to maintain psychological stability while building meaningful civilian relationships, a combination that proved elusive for many former special operations personnel. Your ability to compartmentalize your military experience while remaining connected to civilian life is actually quite rare, Morrison had explained during their phone conversation. Most people either completely suppress their military identity, which creates internal conflict, or they become so identified with their military service that they struggle to adapt to civilian environments. You seem to have found a middle path that honors both aspects of your experience. Morrison's research had revealed that successful military to civilian transitions often depended on finding ways to apply military skills and values in civilian contexts that felt meaningful and purposeful. Maria's decade of stable employment, her positive relationship with her daughter, and her handling of the workplace harassment situation had demonstrated the kind of integration that his study was designed to understand and potentially replicate for other veterans facing similar challenges. The conversation with Morrison had prompted Maria to reflect on her own journey in ways that she had been avoiding since leaving the military. She had been so focused on creating separation between her military and civilian identities that she had never considered how her military experience might actually enhance her civilian contributions rather than simply representing a chapter she needed to move beyond. Sophia's graduation from nursing school had provided another catalyst for Maria's evolving perspective on the relationship between her military past and civilian future. The graduation ceremony had been attended by Elena's family, several of Maria's new colleagues from the veterans community, and Dr. Morrison, who had become interested in Sophia's own career choice as an example of how military families process trauma and service through subsequent generations. During her graduation speech, Sophia had surprised everyone by acknowledging her mother's military service and its influence on her own commitment to serving others in high-pressure situations. "My mother taught me that strength isn't about never being afraid," Sophia had told the audience. "It's about doing what needs to be done even when you are afraid, especially when other people are depending on you to remain calm and focused." The speech had marked the first time that Sophia had publicly connected her career choice to her mother's military background, representing a fundamental shift in how both women understood the relationship between Maria's past service and their current family life. The acknowledgement had created opportunities for conversations about values, purpose, and the different ways that people could serve their communities while building meaningful personal lives. Phoenix Corporate Tower had undergone its own transformation. In the months following the incident with Brandon Mitchell, the building's management company had invested in comprehensive renovations that included not only updated technology and improved amenities, but also symbolic changes that reflected their commitment to creating inclusive environments for all occupants. The building's common areas now featured displays honoring local veterans, community service organizations, and the diverse backgrounds of people who worked throughout the tower. Tom Walsh had used the incident as a catalyst for broader changes at Pinnacle Marketing Solutions that extended far beyond harassment prevention into fundamental questions about corporate culture, leadership development, and social responsibility. The company had established partnerships with veterans organizations, implemented mentorship programs that connected junior employees with community leaders from diverse backgrounds, and created volunteer opportunities that encouraged employees to contribute their professional skills to nonprofit organizations serving underrepresented populations. The transformation at Pinnacle had attracted attention from other companies seeking to improve their own workplace cultures, leading to consulting opportunities that had become a significant part of the firm's business model. Walsh's willingness to acknowledge past failures while demonstrating genuine commitment to improvement had enhanced the company's reputation and had resulted in new client relationships with organizations that valued ethical business practices and social responsibility. Lisa Rodriguez had leveraged her role as a witness to the original incident into a position as Pinnacle's Director of Community Relations, a newly created role that focused on building bridges between the company and the broader Phoenix community. Her natural empathy and her understanding of workplace dynamics from multiple perspectives had made her effective at identifying potential problems before they escalated, while also creating positive relationships that benefited both the company and its community partners. Rodriguez's work had included developing programs that provided career development opportunities for service workers throughout the building, recognizing that economic mobility and professional respect were interconnected goals that required intentional support rather than simply good intentions. Her efforts had resulted in several cleaning staff members pursuing additional education and training that had led to promotions within their companies or transitions to other career paths that better utilize their capabilities and interests. The broader Phoenix business community had continued to grapple with the implications of Maria's story, particularly as it related to unconscious bias, workplace hierarchies, and the recognition of hidden talent within their organizations. The Arizona Business Leaders Association had commissioned a study of workplace culture that had revealed systemic patterns of disrespect toward service workers, support staff, and other employees whose contributions were often taken for granted, despite being essential for organizational success. The study had led to the implementation of dignity standards across multiple companies, including regular surveys of employee experiences regardless of position level, mandatory inclusion training that addressed issues beyond legal compliance, and recognition programs that celebrated contributions from all organizational levels. These changes had been driven not only by ethical considerations, but also by growing recognition that respectful workplace cultures attracted better talent, improved productivity, and reduced turnover costs. Maria's decision to accept the position with the Department of Veterans Affairs had required her to relocate her primary workplace, but had allowed her to maintain her evening cleaning position at Phoenix Corporate Tower on a reduced schedule. The combination provided her with financial stability while creating opportunities to apply her military experience in service of other veterans who were struggling with their own transition challenges. The VA position involved working with former combat personnel who were experiencing difficulties with civilian employment, family relationships, or psychological adjustment following their military service. Maria's role included individual counseling, group facilitation, and consultation with employers who were seeking to better support their veteran employees. Her combination of special operations experience and successful civilian career transition made her uniquely qualified to address the complex challenges that many veterans faced when trying to build meaningful lives after military service. Work had reconnected Maria with aspects of her military identity that she had been suppressing, but in ways that felt constructive rather than threatening to her civilian stability. She was able to draw on her tactical training, leadership experience, and understanding of military culture, while applying these skills in support of healing and growth rather than combat operations. One of Maria's first clients at the VA had been a former Army Ranger who had been struggling with employment stability since leaving the military 3 years earlier. Michael Chun, no relation to the building manager David Chun, had served 2 deployments in Afghanistan and had received commendations for valor during combat operations, but he had been unable to maintain civilian employment for longer than 6 months at a time. Chun's employment difficulties had stemmed partly from his inability to translate his military experience into language that civilian employers could understand and appreciate, but more fundamentally from his own struggle to find civilian work that felt meaningful after the intense purpose and camaraderie of military service. His pattern of job changes had created financial instability that had strained his marriage and had contributed to depression and anxiety that had gone largely untreated. Maria's work with Chun had focused on helping him identify the transferable skills from his military experience, while also addressing the psychological adjustment challenges that were interfering with his civilian career success. Their sessions had included practical elements like resume writing and interview preparation, but the most important work had involved helping Chun develop a sense of civilian purpose that could provide the kind of meaning and direction that military service had previously supplied. The breakthrough in Chun's case had come when Maria had connected him with volunteer opportunities at a local nonprofit organization that provided emergency services training to civilian first responders. Chun's military experience had made him an excellent instructor for tactical emergency medical care, while his teaching responsibilities had given him a sense of purpose and community that had been missing from his civilian employment experiences. Chun's success in the volunteer role had led to a full-time position with the nonprofit organization and had provided him with a career path that utilized his military skills while serving his community in ways that felt meaningful and important. His case had become a model for Maria's approach to veteran career counseling, demonstrating the importance of finding civilian applications for military experience that honored both the skills acquired during service and the values that had motivated that service. The success of Maria's work at the VA had attracted attention from other veterans, organizations, and had led to invitations to speak at conferences, participate in policy discussions, and contribute to research about effective veteran transition programs. Her unique combination of special operations experience and successful civilian career transition had made her a valuable voice in conversations about how military experience could be better integrated into civilian career development. Maria had also been approached about writing a book about her experiences, both military and civilian, but she had declined these opportunities in favor of focusing on direct service to other veterans. Her preference remained for one-on-one counseling and small group work where she could have direct impact on individual lives rather than broader public platforms that might compromise her privacy or her family's stability. Sophia's work as a trauma nurse had created unexpected connections to her mother's new role at the VA, as many of the patients Sophia treated were veterans dealing with both physical injuries and psychological trauma that affected their recovery processes. The two women had begun sharing insights about effective approaches to working with people who had experienced combat trauma, though they were careful to maintain appropriate professional boundaries and confidentiality requirements. The parallel paths of their careers had strengthened their relationship while also providing both women with deeper understanding of how their family's military experience had shaped their approaches to service and their commitment to helping others navigate difficult circumstances. Sophia's nursing training had given her new appreciation for her mother's military medical training, while Maria's work with veterans had enhanced her understanding of the healthcare challenges that many former military personnel faced during their civilian transitions. Elena's children had reached ages where they were beginning to consider their own career paths, and several had expressed interest in military service or careers in public service that had been inspired by their families. Stories about Carlos and Maria's military experiences. Their interest had prompted family conversations about the different ways that people could serve their communities and their country, including both military and civilian paths that contributed to public welfare and national security. The annual cemetery visit had evolved into a family tradition that included not only remembrance of Carlos, but also celebration of the positive impact that his service and sacrifice had continued to have through the choices that his family members had made in their own lives. The tradition had helped Elena's children understand that military service was part of a broader commitment to serving others and protecting the values that made civilian freedom and prosperity possible. Maria's relationship with the Phoenix corporate tower community had also continued to evolve as her reduced cleaning schedule had allowed for more interaction with building occupants during regular business hours. Corporate employees who had only known her as the quiet evening cleaner had begun to understand her as a colleague whose insights about workplace dynamics, conflict resolution, and team leadership were valuable contributions to their own professional development. The transformation had been gradual but profound, as Maria's dual role as VA counselor and building service worker had challenged conventional assumptions about career hierarchies and professional categories. Her presence had created opportunities for conversations about the value of different types of work and the importance of recognizing contributions regardless of job titles or salary levels. Tom Walsh had begun consulting with Maria about leadership development programs at Pinnacle, recognizing that her military experience and her perspective as a service worker had given her unique insights about organizational dynamics and effective management approaches. Her contributions to executive training sessions had been particularly valuable in helping senior leaders understand how their behavior affected all organizational levels and how respect and dignity could be implemented as practical management tools rather than simply moral imperatives. The consulting work had provided Maria with additional income while also creating opportunities to influence workplace cultures beyond her direct service to veterans. Her recommendations had included specific protocols for cross-departmental communication, regular feedback mechanisms that included all employee levels, and recognition systems that celebrated contributions from throughout organizational hierarchies. The impact of Maria's story had extended beyond Phoenix through professional networks, conference presentations, and case studies that had been incorporated into business school curricula and corporate training programs. Her experience had become a teaching tool for discussions about unconscious bias, workplace respect, and the recognition that every organization includes people whose backgrounds and capabilities might be far more impressive than their current roles would suggest. The legacy of her confrontation with Brandon Mitchell had evolved from a single incident of workplace justice into a broader conversation about how societies could better recognize and utilize the talents and experience of all community members. Maria's choice to remain in her cleaning position while also pursuing work that utilized her military experience had demonstrated that meaningful career success could be defined in multiple ways and that individual fulfillment might come from combining different types of service rather than pursuing traditional advancement within single career paths. As Maria prepared to leave for the cemetery visit with Elena, she reflected on the unexpected ways that her military past had become integrated with her civilian present. The confrontation that had forced her to reveal her Delta Force background had ultimately led to opportunities for service that honored both her military training and her commitment to building peaceful civilian communities. The warrior she had tried to bury had been transformed into a healer and advocate whose strength served protection and growth rather than combat and conflict. The story of Maria Santos continued to ripple through the Phoenix community and beyond, reminding everyone who encountered it that the most important qualities in human character often remain hidden until circumstances require their revelation. Her legacy stood as proof that true strength lies not in domination but in service, that the most impressive achievements often belong to those who choose quiet dignity over public recognition, and that every person deserves to be treated with respect regardless of their apparent status or circumstances. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.